be talking about history. Rajesh Srinivasan and I go back a long time in history ourselves. We are classmates at the IIT, and since then he graduated in electronics, which was at that time the up and coming field. And he then went to some place in the US, I think Syracuse, and he worked for a couple of years at Bell Labs, which was then still AT&T. And then he moved to the dark side. He went to Stanford and got an MBA. Okay. And he then went to Sun Microsystems in the beginning years of it. So he has a vast experience. The next time I saw him, he was driving a red BMW, and he was an applications and sales person or something like that. Then he moved back to India, and he has been setting up. He's an expert on innovation and entrepreneurship. He now works as an adjunct faculty member at IIM Bangalore in the area of innovation. And so, please. And all this is other interest. He's very well known in many circles for his non-technical contributions. He used to be a pain to argue with in the IIT.
Thank you, Narayan, for that very kind introduction. And thanks to Satya, I don't see him here, and Usha and all the other organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak here. And this is a particularly important day for us at IIT Madras because this is the 60th anniversary of the founding of IIT Madras. So there are a bunch of events all over the country and all over the world today, so I hope to attend the one in Chennai this evening. But my topic is about innovation in general and also the role of Indian tradition in innovation. So here's my agenda, and before I start, let me just get my clock going here so I can finish in 25 minutes. So the three topics that I wanted to talk about. One is the idea of exceptionalism, about how India is in fact an exceptional country. And then the major theme of this conference, of course, sustainability, and the concept of a grand narrative. So we'll talk about those. Then we have this idea that India is the empire of the soul, the empire of spirituality, but actually it is the empire of the intellect as well. And this is something that's not quite so widely known. So we'll take a look at that. And finally, to bring these threads to the current time, what's happening in Indian innovation, at least from a perspective of startups and the kinds of areas that they're working in. So to start off, we'll talk about these topics: exceptionalism, sustainability, and the Indian grand narrative. We've all heard, I think, of American exceptionalism. In fact, they talk a lot about how America is an exceptional country. They talk about their origin as a civilization, the Pilgrim Fathers, whatnot, and they do make a big fuss about that fact. And these days, the Chinese have latched on to the same idea, and they talk about their exceptionalism. So we have two concepts. One is the idea of Protestant work ethic, and now there is a Chinese or Confucian work ethic. But the fact is, you can make a very strong argument that India is even more exceptional and truly unique. We'll look at some of these. One is that there have been many civilizations, they've all sustained themselves on warfare, and there's tremendous evidence that India was just about the only civilization that was truly peaceful. It's also arguable that it is the only ancient civilization that has survived. Yes, it's been attacked and it's been bloodied a bit, but it's still mostly intact. And that's not even true of the Chinese, because after the 20th century, with communism really breaking a lot of what existed. So we're still alive, more or less. So that's a major thing. But the other fact that is of interest is that there are some great ideas that have come out of the Indic culture. No other civilization really talks about the sanctity of all life, including animal life and plant life. And this is a bedrock of our civilization. The idea of balance, and I think Dr. Pradhan touched upon this. There are many factors that are colliding, and we need to find a balance amongst them. For example, when we talk about gut bacteria, this has become a major area of research in medicine. And it turns out that you got good bacteria and you got bad bacteria, and the way they balance each other, which actually reminds you of the Ayurvedic idea of Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and the balance amongst them. That's now becoming an important concept. And there are rhythms, there are natural rhythms that we observe, everything from the circadian rhythm to the seasons and so forth, and we were very conscious of that. An important aspect is the idea of the commons. There are things that are not anybody's property. Those are the common heritage of all people or all societies or that society, for example, grazing lands. Now, the West has this idea of capturing some of these commons as personal property. So you see this in the entire intellectual property regimen, whereas in India, we kept the idea of the commons, and it's a very important perspective. And one more thing that doesn't get enough visibility is the idea that we have had tremendous local participation in governance. And a very good example is in Chingalput district, not far from here, Uttaramerur, there are village temple inscriptions that talk about how democracy should be done. How do you choose candidates for elections? And what are their qualifications? What are their penalties if they don't do their job? You know, how often, if you don't show up for 3 consecutive meetings, you lose your position. It's very, very sensible, but very old stuff. So these are all things that we've had as exceptional ideas that have come out of here. Furthermore, we talked a lot about scale, and I think Satya, you talked about scale yesterday. It was a very important issue for us. Everything we do in India is on such a large scale that nobody else has the same problem except maybe China, and in fact that makes our solutions also unique. I'm not able to move this forward. So next slide, please. Okay, this is a picture I got from the net on American exceptionalism. What's interesting here is that it's all based on power. Look at that. That woman is carrying a battleship, right? So they became exceptional because they were a military power. And as I was saying, that's not necessarily true of us. Next, okay. So the Indic ideas that are really important. One is that we've always thought that there are no limits to growth, but that's not true, right? We are running up against this finite planet. Those of you who are from Chennai, you know that. Running out of water. We heard a lot about other things, running out of, the sea's infinite resources. The second thing, as I mentioned a minute ago, is intellectual property. Most of you are familiar with things like Linux and so forth, which are open source and very powerful business models. This is an epistemical model that we invented in India, where somebody invents something and they put it in the public domain for anybody to use, right? That, in fact, was an extremely powerful mechanism as compared to the patent mechanism that is prevalent today. Then the other part is centralized control. On the one hand, it's diminishing because of blockchain, the fact that we have autonomous vehicles and drones, etc. So this is making centralized control a little bit difficult. On the other hand, what the Chinese have, their panopticon, where you're constantly under surveillance, is increasing control. So there is this balance or this tussle between increasing and decreasing control. And heterogeneity. We're the most heterogeneous civilization that ever existed. And we run this in a drastically different way than, say, the Chinese do. The Chinese are attempting to homogenize. Then they've always done this. They go to the periphery of their nation and they capture the people there and homogenize them. They did that to the Mongols, Inner Mongolia. They've done that to the Tibetans, and they're doing that to the Uyghurs right now, whereas we respect heterogeneity. And I think that's an important aspect for a world that is less conflict-ridden. This is from a study called the Club of Rome Limits to Growth. They wrote this in 1972, and then they revised it in 2009, I think. And they're talking about the fact that, that straight curve is the carrying capacity of the Earth, the straight line. And we already exceeded that in the 1980s, and we're continuing to worsen the situation unless we at some point reverse it. So the way I would articulate Indic ideas is through this grand narrative. As I mentioned, there is a Protestant grand narrative from the Americans and the Confucian grand narrative from the Chinese. But the problem with both of those is they're about more. More nukes, more money, more GDP, more meat, more, right? Whereas the Indian grand narrative is the only one where we've been able to say, enough. I have enough. Okay? And that is precisely what underlies the idea of the vanaprastha. You reach a stage in life and thereafter you're giving up stuff. You're no longer accumulating stuff. And this is a powerful philosophical meme that says, yes, there are limits to what I want and what I need. And I should be able to stop. Because there is if any of you have read the famous Dr. Faustus story, it's a cornerstone of Western philosophy. Dr. Faust is given the opportunity to stop time. He could stop time whenever he wished, in return for which the devil gets his soul. But he could never stop time because there was never a time when he said, I'm happy, enough, right? Whereas an Indian would not have that problem. Okay, right. And as has been mentioned already, India is already the fifth largest economy, and it's quite likely to become the third largest in the next 10-15 years. Interesting diagram from a person named Angus Madison. He did a history of the world economy. You can see this salmon-shaped, pink-shaped bar. That's India. This is the year 1 CE. As you can see, India is a very large fraction of the world's economy until the time that the British show up. At that time, we were about, 25% of the world's economy, and Britain was about 2%. And by the time they left, which is about here, we're 2% and they're 15%. So they've massively rearranged our economy. And now we're beginning to grow back up a little bit again. And so what we do in India has a significant impact on the world. So moving on to this topic of the empire of the intellect, we have invented and discovered far more than we give ourselves credit for. For example, if you look at creativity in this country, and I'm going to skip the ideas of artistic creativity, which are immense. You see that all around, right? Everything from Hampi to the Brihadeshwara temple to all the major, Ellora, all sorts of things. But it's an extremely creative and prosperous country. And an important aspect of creativity is that you got to have enough money and resources to keep people fed properly. That's when you get to be creative, and we did that. But a lot of our creativity was in the abstract realm, but not all. It's quite a bit that is concrete. And as I mentioned, we even have invented an entire epistemological method, which has been copied in the open source movement. I don't know if they copied it consciously or not, but it's similar. If you look at the history of the old Indus Saraswati, it's remarkable. Mehrgarh, which is in Balochistan, was settled around 7000 BCE. It's 9,000 years ago. And if you look at the Indus Saraswati area, it's greater than Mesopotamia and Egypt, both of which were contemporary civilizations, put together, an enormous amount of land. But what is astonishing is that they're the same weights and measures all over, in binary no less, right? Brick size is the same, and they also have decimal. And a whole bunch of these sites are now, as you can see in this diagram from Michel Danino, this is the course of the extinct Saraswati, and this is the course of the Indus. And as you can see, the majority of the sites, these black spots, are clustered around the Saraswati, not the Indus. So the Saraswati was the major river that contributed to the civilization. And you have Lothal here, for example, which was one of the greatest ports in the ancient world. So they have a dry dock, which meant they were supporting ocean-going ships. So an immense land area where this civilization existed, and we still continue to maintain a lot of the traditions from those times. To look at more recent things, I'm not going to go through this whole list, but to pick up a couple of them, Panini's grammar is 2,500 years old, in the Kerala School of Mathematics, great stuff. And then a lot of things that we see in the West, the monasticism in Christianity is borrowed from the Buddhists. the mythology, a great deal of the mythology is directly lifted from our myths. And if you look at this surprising little artifact called the Gundestrup cauldron, it was created around 100 CE, and they found it in a peat bog, I think, in Sweden. And it has very identifiably Indic memes. You've seen that horned deity in the Saraswati the seals, they have that. And they also have a very Lakshmi-like image of this goddess being showered with water by two elephants. Very identifiably Hindu memes. And the funny thing is the elephants don't look very much like elephants. So it sounds like it was created by people who had heard of elephants but had never seen them. So our ideas spread far and wide, and we obviously know these modern greats. Now, why are these things interesting? You know, if you look at the context-free grammar of Panini or some of the other inventions of infinite series, again, I'll just quickly go through these. These abstract ideas have had extremely practical value. For example, you know that the numerical system that was invented here is the cornerstone of all science and mathematics. The infinite series invented by, I say with pride, the Kerala School of Mathematics, which is not far from your place, Narayan, Irinjalakuda, they came up with what are now called Taylor series and Maclaurin series and so forth, several hundred years before the Europeans discovered them. And they came up with the basics of calculus. They didn't do the whole thing. You have to give Newton and Leibniz credit for that. But their manuscripts were taken to the Vatican. And it's believed that it's from Madhava's manuscripts that both Leibniz and Newton may have gotten their ideas of the calculus. But even more remarkably, those sine tables, or those tables of trigonometric numbers, enable the Europeans to colonize the world. Because using those tables and an accurate clock and a sextant, you could tell precisely where you were on the surface of the earth. Before that, Europeans never sailed out of sight of the land because they didn't know where they were. So it had practical uses, but it really hurt us, nevertheless. And then Panini's context-free grammar, without going into any details about it, that is the basis of all computing. Without computing languages, you couldn't have computers, and they rediscovered, the American scientists at IBM rediscovered Panini's grammar in 1950, and that is 2,500 years old already. But it's not just the abstract, many practical arts as well. Dharampal that I mentioned, I request all of you youngsters to go pick it up on the web and read it. He has a 5-volume work, and one of those, has all this detail about Indian medicine. And one of the interesting things there is inoculation against smallpox. It was done in a routine manner by Vaidyas in Bengal, but the British banned it as a barbaric practice. And then when Edward Jenner discovered this, they were like, wow, this is great stuff. And so that happened. In agriculture, again from Dharampal, the British were totally impressed by our agricultural productivity. In fact, India is a potential superpower because 57% of our land, if irrigated, can be cultivated. The corresponding numbers for America is only 15%, and for China plus Tibet also only 14%. And look at this data about productivity, agricultural productivity, mostly from Tamil Nadu, came from Bajaj and Srinivas at the Chennai Institute of Development Studies. 15 tons of paddy per hectare. In 1993, the best we can do is 5.5 tons of paddy. So there are these great techniques that they had then. I'm not sure what they were, but they were able to do that. Agriculture, if you look at barley, it's clear that it was domesticated around 7,000 BCE. Then you look at, I'll show you a couple of pictures. Rice, I recently found out, the indica rice was actually domesticated in India before japonica was domesticated in China. And then zebu cattle, they're disappearing in India, the humped cattle, but they are very visible, say in Brazil or in America or other parts of the world where they've taken our genetic material, in fact digested our genetic material. So here is Mergar in Balochistan, and this is Nagarkoil, a rice-growing area. The Grand Anicut, built by Karikala Chola 2,000 years ago, 1960 years ago, I think to be precise, still working. Another practical art is textiles, and we were the world's greatest textile power. So, a lot of the words used for textiles come from India, chins and calico and whatnot. Examples of the variety of textiles that we had. Education, I mentioned this briefly yesterday. It was open to all jatis, and this is from Dharampal again. And the education system that we have now is intended to produce drones, people who just take orders and not think. Okay, and the science and technology, these two deltas, the Kaveri Delta and the Brahmaputra Delta, were the greatest sources of small and medium enterprises in the world, and something like 25% of the world's products produced came from there. And specifically, for example, the iron pillar in Delhi, and woods. Woods is a word that comes from the Tamil urukka, meaning steel, and this was nanocarbon steel that they created here a few centuries ago. And it is based on using a bunch of biological material in their hearts. Okay, so moving on from this, there were a bunch of other things that we did very well before. So these are practical things that were done. So how does all this relate to innovation in India today? One of the unfortunate problems is that we focus on jugad, which is ingenuity, right? You use your ingenuity to overcome whatever handicaps that are put upon you by the environment. But these are non-scalable, non-industrial strength, and they're not even quality controllable. So we got to get away from that. And again, we're doing very little product innovation. Unfortunately, product innovation is the thing that is scalable, that gives you the massive returns. We are pretty good at copying process innovation, and there's nothing wrong with that. For example, Ola is a copy of Uber, and Flipkart is a copy of Amazon. That's fine, but we also got to do the products. We have been lulled into this false sense of complacency because of the easy revenue we've got from services, and also ham-handedness in policy, like for example, the inability to keep our data to ourselves has caused us problems. And unfortunately, there are no platforms, because we've gone from the era of services to the era of software products, and now it's platforms, and we have none. And even software products, we probably should leapfrog and move towards platforms. Today, Reliance Jio is the one platform that may be on the way. Here is one reason, maybe causative, maybe correlation. We have very few researchers compared to, say, Israel or South Korea or Japan per million people. And there are several technologies in which our presence is quite negligible. Machine learning, for example, CRISPR, quantum computing, cultured meat. I think this is going to be a big thing, where instead of slaughtering animals, which is also contributing a great deal to global warming, and then the ethical question of killing animals, if we're able to take something like pea protein and convert that into something that looks and tastes and feels like meat, which companies like Beyond Meat and Memphis Meats and so forth are doing, or culturing it. You take meat cells and put it in a vat and convert that into meat. So this, I think, is a big industry, and we're nowhere there. And worse, I think our complete absence in semiconductors and electronics is a huge problem. So these are some handicaps that we're facing. And I think we really need to get our act together on this. Also, even if somebody comes up with something really interesting, we do not have the capability to productize it and scale it and take it to market. These are sad examples. Simputer, when it came out, it is a multilingual network computer, and a whole lot of things that the iPhone did when it came out and was considered wonderful, these were already in the Simputer, but we were not able to bring it to market. And Reva was ahead of its time before Tesla and Elon Musk and so forth, and sort of vanished without a trace. I was running an incubator for electronics, and I ran into a lot of startups, and one of the big problems is that they have no idea about marketing. They're technical entrepreneurs. They know how to make a technology, bring it to the prototype stage, but then they have no concept. They think that's it, I'm done. I built a prototype, why aren't people coming and buying my stuff? So that link, something that I try to get IIM Corey Code to collaborate with me, but it didn't really work. But that's a major lacuna that I think things like the IIT Madras Tech Park are handling by giving them those links. There's not that much risk capital, venture capital is limited. And I think also people tend to not pay attention to the customer, especially the local customer. And what's interesting is that if you can make things happen in India, they can be used in a large geography from Africa to Southeast Asia. But all's not lost. I've been teaching at IIMB for some years, and I asked them, my students, to go find innovative startups, and this is for a global contest. And usually it's healthcare that predominates. And these are slides I made a couple of years ago when I was running Maker Village. So NetExplo is this UNESCO subsidiary or UNESCO affiliate that runs this global contest. So 37 ideas were spotted by my students, and half of them were in healthcare, which is a remarkably large number. And one of them, in fact, got shortlisted for the grand prize in 2017. Unfortunately, they didn't win. But here are some examples. Machine learning in healthcare. Cure.ai was the entity that was in the running for the grand prize in the top 10 companies that were found. Then there is data collection. There's also a problem in India. We don't have enough people out there capturing the data from patients. This one I actually liked a lot, this Akira Labs product. They're using yarn, a product from industrial. Oops, my clock's up, so how do I turn this off? Give me a second while I shut it off. Okay. No, it refuses to be shut off. I have to give it, okay. That's it, thanks. Okay. Yeah, using yarn, they were creating a product that's quite useful. Okay. Then wearables, a bunch of people who are using wearables to monitor babies, fetuses, etc., and health records. So all these are things that were just in one area. So it's not that there aren't entrepreneurial startups out there, but how many of them really make it big? I don't know. That's a good question. I saw this a couple of days ago. It says India is the 5th most startup-friendly country in the world, and I was rather startled to hear that. But that's good news if it's in fact so. So, to conclude, I believe that based on the fact that we're talking about sustainability and a limited planet, the Indic paradigm is something that is most appropriate and most necessary. And if you look at our history, we know that we did all these things in the past. We're quite capable. So why can't we take that self-confidence and self-respect to go forward and do things into the future? I honestly believe that this country is going to face a renaissance this year. And instead of looking at the problems of other people, we really need to look at our problems, and that's the way to success. So I'll stop here, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Yeah, Didi.
Haven't we had intra-wars within our civilization, kings and emperors constantly in battle and a lot of bloodshed, even in Mahabharata?
Well, let me point out that that was sort of ritualistic warfare. Ritualistic warfare, like the Japanese. You had a bunch of mercenaries, often, samurai. The samurai fight with each other. The common man is not affected. You see what I'm saying? You are a cultivator, you continue to cultivate. These guys go there, they have a set pattern. We fight from dawn to dusk. Dharmic warfare. But I was going even further to the Indus-Saraswati era, when there are no signs of warfare there, right? There are not even like royal residences, not even, the residences of like military leaders or anything. There was no warfare there. Yeah, it's not that we were peaceful. Like, for example, Raja Chola went and fought in Sumatra, right, in 1017. Yeah, it's not that we were peaceful necessarily, but it was a ritualized, contained warfare, right? So that would be my answer. It's not total war where you're laying waste to the countryside. Okay? No more questions? Great. Yeah.
If I may.
Yeah.
You said India lacks in those spheres of technological innovation that you listed.
Yeah.
What should it be doing? Should it be at a state level or the university level? We don't have a university, anything like Stanford or in the park or other places. Park, PRC.
Yeah.
We don't have any such innovation nodes. Government of India standing up and saying,
IIT Madras.
yeah, I mean, it's a good attempt. I mean, it's not visible yet, is it? I mean, it's not visible, not well known.
Well, I mean, I think...
What's your suggestion?
I think it's a very large question. I think our education system has to be revamped right from the school. One of the problems is English. We study English and we end up being second-hand people. All our ideas come from the West, right? We don't even believe we can invent new things, right? So if we start doing mother tongue education, that itself is a huge plus. Secondly, the curriculum, right? It's a first industrial revolution curriculum, not a fourth industrial revolution curriculum. Because today, what happens in a school, if a kid asks a question, it's told, shut up and sit down. Mug this stuff up and reproduce it in the exam, right? Creativity is murdered in our schools. So that's a big problem.
What about technical technology?
In fact, it's quite possible if you have AI-based curriculum plans, they can be customized to each individual student. Well, that's a different matter. I do have some ideas about that, but I'm thinking it's actually even better to say, take the entire world's knowledge and translate it into Sanskrit. So for example, MOOCs are out there. Why don't we translate all those MOOCs into Sanskrit? Real-time translation. It's not possible today in Sanskrit because there isn't enough of an English to Sanskrit data set. But if we can manufacture that, we should be able to learn in Sanskrit or in Hindi or Telugu or whatever, right? So mother tongue education is a major part of it. Yeah, it's not 300, 500 years ago, and even 300 years ago. This is from Angus Madison, who wrote this as the official millennial document for the OECD. It's about as authoritative as it gets.
It's a government document.
Yeah, OECD.
No, it's not a government document. No, it's
OECD.
that's a non-state.
It's a supranational document, but it's considered absolutely accurate. Now, the criticism is that it's simply because of population. GDP is correlated to population. India and China had the largest populations, but that meant everybody else is, somebody is talking about convergence, economic convergence. If you consider everybody to be at the same GDP per head, then your GDP is going to be greater. But this is widely accepted matter, the fact that we did control a significant portion of the world's GDP.
Thank you.
Yeah, over there.
In the ancient time, the technology is labor intensive. It is practiced by different occupation groups, agriculture and medicine and all. Like that, because to promote creativity, certain occupational groups are dedicated for creativity promoted from many generations. But the present context, it is power-driven technology. It is more advantageous to the developed countries than the developing countries like India. They are gradually going from labor-intensive to power-intensive technology, and there is a lack of creativity in India in the power-driven technology. The system has to be changed. The education system has to be changed to adapt ourselves to the present context. That is what I feel. But when we compare the ancient time and present time, there was social stability is high, and also economic sustainability is high because of the occupational groups that we call as a caste system. There was a system which has promoted economic sustainability, and social stability.
What is the question?
This is a major difference because
what is the question?
the creativity is not as we see now, as we see in the past. It has become lesser because of the power-driven technology.
Okay, let me answer that by saying, today, as AI advances, most occupations will be hollowed out. You know, medicine or engineering or law, a lot of the routine things that are being done by humans will be taken over by machines in the near future. So what will be left for humans to do is only the really creative stuff. And we've got a lot of people here who could potentially be creative, and we need to enhance that creativity through the education system, and that is the answer. I'm not sure it's going back necessarily to a jati system, although I don't see anything wrong with the jati system per se. So it's not power versus labor. In fact, labor is the thing that's going to become more and more important as you go forward. When you, for example, when you say labor is doing the creative stuff, not the routine stuff.
Naraji, one question, just very crisp, very crisp. Srinivasanji, you just said about risk capital, right? How can we motivate the Indian corporate to adhere to the 2% CSR mandate, funneling it for risk capital, for creativity at the basic level? And I'll be alluding to that in my talk. But just an answer to this, how can we motivate that? It's not happening. Whereas in other countries, it's voluntary.
Well, I would say CSR is a hidden tax. That's what it is. Okay? Nobody likes taxes. So they do whatever they can to just, casually give it to somebody. They're not thinking of making that useful to the country or anything. So taxing people often is the wrong answer. So CSR being imposed on people is not going to create any venture capital out of it, I don't think. There need to be other mechanisms.
All right. Thank you.
So we managed to overcome the technical challenge. Apologies for that. So a very good morning to all of you. I'm very happy to be here. The topic that I'm going to talk about is neo-skilling for interorganizational dynamics. So as Professor Narayanan said, I had the privilege of working with Professor L. Prasad. We together worked on this book called Neo-Skilling for Digital Transformation. So I'll share more details about this book as we make progress. So thanks to Professor Narayanan, Mr. Rajiv and the organizers for giving me an opportunity to talk about some of our ideas in this conference. So this is the agenda. We'll talk about skills, why skills really matter. I'll give you some examples, and then we'll go into what exactly we mean by neo-skilling. All of you would have heard this term reskilling. Reskilling is basically to teach new skills to people, but neo-skilling is a little futuristic. It's a concept. It's not just about instructor-led classroom training. It is a cultural transformation, not just for large corporates, but even for our society. Because our hypothesis is that because of the rate at which technology is growing today, as citizens, each one of us need to pick up new skills. We need to start believing in lifelong learning. Right? Those days where you pick up one skill, whether it's carpentry, whether it is programming or any other skill that you have, there is a risk of machines taking away. So Professor Rajiv Srinivasan also touched upon it. So my presentation will also be in alignment with what he says. Right? So we are an ancient civilization, but the rate at which new technologies are coming, many jobs, traditional jobs are at risk. So we need to start believing in lifelong learning, which again is part of our culture. In Tamil Nadu, whether you look at poet Avayar or Thiruvalluvar, they've all spoken about it. So it's not something very new. It has been part of our culture, but it has been forgotten. So we'll try to bring back some of those points. We have covered a lot of this in the book, but I may not be able to touch upon all of them today. And then we look at socially inclusive reskilling. The predominant focus has been on large corporates, but we'll also touch upon how to make it socially inclusive. And then we look at interorganizational dynamics. Again, our hypothesis is that there are several cases of companies which have gone bankrupt because of these new technologies. At the same time, there are companies which have adopted very well. So we'll see what makes a difference. And our hypothesis is that interorganizational dynamics plays a big role here. And then we'll finish it off with what we basically call a knowledge-based economy. So skills really matter, right? So the days of competitive advantage where labor arbitrage or the location or availability of cheap materials, that is slowly going away. So these days skills is becoming more important. So let's take as an example, right? Apple as a company, all of us are aware of it. It's a very valuable company. And all of us know that their products are made out of China, right? Most of their products, that's what their products is, designed in US, made in China. So why do you think these products are made in China? What is the popular perception? Why does Apple make all its products out of China? Yeah, cheap labor, right? Any other answers? Scale, yeah. So all those are valid points, but who better to answer this than Tim Cook himself? So when Cook was asked, why do you make these products out of China? He said it's basically because of skill. So yes, labor arbitrage is there, cheap labor is there, infrastructure is better in China. All those answers are there, but it's basically because of the skill of people available. Sorry? Yeah, they follow the procedures. Yeah, that comes next, but basically this is what Tim said, to quote from his one. He said, China has moved into very advanced manufacturing where there is this intersection of craftsman kind of skill plus sophisticated, the old and the new economy, if you want to call it that way. Plus, yes, yeah, Japan is an exception, but the cost is high there. So my point here is that we are slowly moving towards a skill-based economy. We may be thinking that China gets all manufacturing, all investments because labor is cheap, people follow processes, but the main thing is skill. So the question for us is, how do we improve skill of our people in these upcoming digital areas? And this is what OECD said. So more and more of investments are happening in locations where there is skill. So one more example is a British company called Dyson, which makes a lot of home appliances. Recently they announced that their factory for making electric vehicles is going to be set up in Singapore of all the places. It's a privately held company. And one of the reasons, the main reasons that is because of the availability of people knowledgeable in these modern technologies out of Singapore. Because all of us know how costly real estate is in Singapore, labor is costly there. But these days, what is called labor elasticity is very low, right? So GDP growth does not correspond to growth in direct employment. That's a big complaint our government is facing today. We may be growing at 7% year over year, but it is not translating into direct employment. That is because the level of automation is very high. So investment is going to countries which have people skilled in these technologies. So we may keep complaining that we don't get investments. So we need to think back. Are we really having an ecosystem that is skilled enough for people to set up factories in India? So we talk about skill, then what exactly is it? So that's where we looked at this continuum of skill development. Like I said initially, reskilling is or new skilling is not just about classroom training, right? These things cannot just be taught in classroom. Even artificial intelligence, that is a starting point. Then you need sound business models, you need entrepreneurs to scale it up and take it to the market, right? So we looked at it as this continuum. It starts with very basic skilling. Skilling is the training that you impart to new joinees, to graduates, to new employees. That's very basic. And then you have upskilling. Upskilling is incremental improvements in what you know. So from a manually operated lathe to a numerically controlled lathe. So that's upskilling. Reskilling is where you move to a completely new domain, let's say a digital way of doing things. And then new skilling is a futuristic way. So our belief is that as academicians, policy makers, business leaders, we need to start thinking of what will be the skill sets required in future. So this is not daydreaming. I'll give you some examples where it's already happening. So our point is that for people in this auditorium and for major decision makers, we need to already start thinking about what will be the skill sets of the future and start preparing for it. So that's what this book was about. We called it neo-skilling. And here is again a report from Accenture that talks about the skill revolution that's happening in India. And if we don't start preparing our youngsters for the skill sets of the future, we may have to forego as much as $2 trillion of GDP growth in the next 5-6 years. So that's almost equivalent to India's GDP. So reskilling is not just for corporates, it's also for the broader society. So this is the hierarchy we look at. If you look at the bottommost, providing information starts from removing information asymmetry, right? So why should only a few privileged sections of the society have access to vital information? Vital information could vary from industry to industry. It could be commodity prices for a trader. It could be weather forecasts or fertilizer prices for a farmer. But there is a lot of democratization of education and information access happening today, so that there is transparency. Everybody has access to all information. And then digital technologies give you a social identity. Aadhaar has been a very successful project which helps direct benefit transfer. There is no leakage of money flow from the government. And then it leads to financial inclusion. So people have a bank account, they are able to build a credit history. It is tied to social identity so that there is no duplication. And this eventually leads to better health, education and employment, and eventually self-sustenance. So if you see on the left side, the value in the society keeps going up as we progress from simple sharing of information to self-sustenance. At the same time, the skills needed is basically coming down. So literacy those days used to mean about learning to read, write languages, but today it's becoming digitally savvy. You need to know how to operate a device like a smartphone for you to make use of this economy. And very interestingly, these three is what is called JAM by the Indian government, right? Jan Dhan Yojana for a basic bank account for financial inclusion, Aadhaar for identity, and mobility for information sharing. Okay, so we look at neo-skilling as a hierarchy. Like I keep insisting, it's not just about classroom training. Then what is reskilling about? So we break it into these 5 levels: awareness, access, affordability, appetite, and ambition. And the 3 main players involved in this are the business, the industry, and individuals. Now in developed countries like US, individuals own up their own career planning. So Pew conducted a research in Silicon Valley, and what came out was that 70-75% of individuals feel that they own their career, they own their reskilling because they have access to information sources. But we cannot expect that out of India. So we asked a lot of business leaders when we wrote the book, and what came out was that government and government industry collaboration, these two are going to be the key players for reskilling of our society in India. So looking at this hierarchy, which one do you think is the biggest challenge for neo-skilling or reskilling in India? Any guesses? Yeah? Access. Government, yeah. If you look at the hierarchy, we asked where is the biggest challenge. So surprisingly, the answer was on awareness. So 40% of the, this is basically business leaders and policy makers, they felt that awareness for new skills, that's the biggest challenge. So they did not know where to start. You have all these big jargons floating around today: big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, 3D printing. They did not know which one to pick up and train their people. So it starts with basic awareness, and then appetite and ambition are the 2 other challenges. So talking about awareness, that's what, once this book was published, we started writing articles in Tamil. So we had approached this magazine called Nanayam Vigadan, which is the business or financial arm of Ananda Vigadan. So we spoke to their managing director, Mr. Srinivasan, we spoke to their editors. So they were very happy to do this. So we are doing this as a weekly series. This Industry 4.0 was the article last week. So tomorrow we are going to talk about some examples of design thinking, soft skills versus hard skills. So our idea is to keep continuing this as a series of articles. In fact, in tomorrow's article, we are also talking about Swayam, which is the MOOCs version promoted by the IITs. Right? So we have met Professor Mangala Sundar and other professors. So awareness is a big issue in our society. Again, Mr. Rajesh Srinivasan mentioned about our mother tongue, right? So there are a lot of things like MOOCs, courses are already available, whether it's MIT or Stanford or Harvard, IITs, all courses are available online. How many people are really aware of it? Because policymakers who run NPTEL or SWAYAM or Coursera or edX, right? All these courses, Professor Anant Agarwal, all of them feel that there is a lot of content lying out there, but people are not using it. So are youngsters really aware of it? MOOCs may be a term they are aware of or maybe not aware, but then do they know that IIT classes are available freely online on Swayam platform? So awareness is a big thing, so we are trying our level best to see what can be done. But this localization of these global concepts is very important, and language, regional language plays a key role there. So here are some examples of companies which have done well versus those which have not done well. So for example, so AT&T, right? So AT&T has been there from Alexander Graham Bell's days. So in the late 2000s, when they felt that when their 75% of their hardware had to be replaced by digital technology, they had a workforce of 280,000. Most of their skill sets were becoming obsolete. So they were at a crossroads. Do they hire new employees who have these skill sets, or do they retrain their people? So they decided to retrain their people. Some 200 or 250 job roles were shrunk to 80 roles. And AT&T gave an opportunity for their employees to reskill themselves in these new technologies. So courses were offered, managers helped their employees to come up, and AT&T eventually did not lay off too many people. They were selected as one of the best places to work with. Similarly, an example in India is Hindustan Teleprinters. This also went through a similar story. They were a monopoly in those days of telegrams making those printers. But when they faced this digital onslaught, they went through privatization. They invested in products like optical fiber. I'm sure there are more experts here who know about it. But my point is, it's not always a gloomy story in India. There are organizations that have successfully overcome such transformations before. At the same time, at the bottom, if you see, there are examples of companies which have not done very well. Again, starting from US, you have Xerox and Kodak, which did not do very well. They saw the types of digital transformation coming, but they did not want to cannibalize their own market. They stuck to their traditional products, and they are, you know where they are today. And again, our example is Hindustan Photo Films, based out of Ooty. It was again a monopoly in making X-ray films and photographic films, but when the digital products started coming, they did not invest in those technologies. They did not retrain their employees, and today it is almost a ghost bungalow, right? Nobody goes there. And here are some of the new roles that are coming in digital economy. Because we always talk about artificial intelligence and robotics taking away people's jobs, but on the other side, there are new roles that are coming up for people who are ready to take it up. Again, in yesterday's paper, there was an article about Amazon, which is going to spend a huge amount of money to retrain 1/3 of its workforce. And they're saying it's not just for jobs we need, we are going to train people even for jobs outside, so that if not in Amazon, people can find a job somewhere else. So some examples, if you look at Uber, there are job openings for what is called a mission specialist role. So for the electric connected, probably even autonomous cars that we are going to see in future, it is not a driver role, it is becoming more of a mission specialist role. So this person should know the mechanics of working of the vehicle. He or she should be able to convey back the performance of the vehicle to some software engineer sitting in Silicon Valley. So that's a picture you see there. It may not be a driver anymore, it will be a very technical specialist who takes you from point A to point B. Amazon's Go store does not have cashiers anymore. So these are all roles which are going to become obsolete, but there will be new roles to take over. So I can keep talking. Every week you see these type of new roles that are coming up. So the point is that for people who are willing to learn new skills, there are jobs out there. But are you willing to do it? So now so we looked at socially inclusive reskilling, but our primary focus is on large corporates. We looked at examples, AT&T and Hindustan Teleprinters, which were successful, at the same time Hindustan Photo Films or Xerox not being so successful. One reason for all that is what we call interorganizational dynamics. So companies which did not do very well got into this vicious circle, which is a very dangerous circle. So here the employees are primarily takers, they are not givers, they are not willing to collaborate with their employees. It's a very, very dog-eat-dog type of syndrome. Yeah. And then their focus is on substantive outcomes, not on relationships with people. And then Professor Pankaj Gemawat had what is called this CAGE framework. CAGE stands for Cultural, Administrative, Geographic and Economic Differences. So CAGE factor was very high in these companies which got into a vicious circle. Benson framework was very low. there was very high goal incongruence. So if you see these signs in companies, so they are typically into this vicious circle, and it is going to take them down into a deep hole. At the same time, companies which are successful are the opposite of this. They are into a very virtuous circle, which makes them to be very healthy organizations and keep growing. So their employees are primarily givers, so they are ready to share ideas, they are ready to collaborate with their partners. So there is a focus on not just substantive outcome, but also on relationship with people. Cage factor is low, Benson framework is high, and goal incongruence is very low. Or in other words, people work towards common goals. So here one more thing that's very important is to be aware of what is called the second order environment, right? So first order environment is your employees, your partners, your customers to whom you are directly in touch with day by day. But second order environment is people beyond the four walls of your enterprise. So it could be analysts outside, it could be some scientists, policy makers, partners, maybe even your competitors. So it is very important for business leaders today to not limit themselves to their first order environment, but also to look at their second order environment. So one interesting example was when Henry Ford was asked, right? So he said, if I had asked my customers what they want, they would have said faster horse-drawn carriages. So people never thought of cars, right? But he came up with this internal combustion engine driven cars. Similarly, if you look at Detroit today, all the big auto companies did not foresee a Google or an Apple giving them a run for the money, right? So Apple, Googles and other Silicon Valley companies today are investing in autonomous cars, and the Toyotas and the Hondas had to play catch up. So it's very important to stay focused beyond just your first order environment. Again, from our study findings, this is predominantly leaders from India. So we asked them, what are the sources you use to decide your reskilling efforts? It's predominantly the first order environment. So there is a big difference between people who focus beyond their first order environment. So it's very important to go beyond your industry. So this is a very, a summary of the interorganizational dynamics. At the bottom, you see what virtuous organizations do. So again, the employees are givers. There is a focus on relationships. So we saw this before. This is just a summary of interorganizational dynamics. So one more important thing beyond all this is what we call the Minimake Framework. So yeah, you have identified reskills. You have identified skills where your employee should be reskilled, but is that sufficient? So not really. So this is where we say companies should not get into this trap of becoming strategically myopic. Myopic is short-sighted, right? Today companies work quarter after quarter. So I have my results coming up. I need to give good numbers to the stakeholders. That's a very short-sighted framework. People need to move. Business leaders need to move beyond that to have a long-sighted vision. And it should not be intellectually impoverished. Again, like what Mr. Rajiv spoke, intellectual property is very important so that we don't get stuck in the jugaad part of it. But most important is the ethics part. So you may train your employees to work with integrity, they don't take bribes, they follow rules and procedures. But in the artificial intelligence era that we are going to see, ethics is something which is very, very important. It's not very easily defined. So here are some examples, right? Amazon's recruitment tool. Knowingly or unknowingly, you may let ethics creep into your decision making. So it may end up as decision making with some discrimination. In case of Amazon's recruitment tool, they came to know much later that the tool gives a preference for male employees when it looks for candidates to fill up open positions. San Francisco has come up with a ban on facial recognition because again there is a drop in accuracy when you look at minorities like women or black people in US. So they said we are not going to use facial recognition because it discriminates among people. So you have many more such examples where knowingly or unknowingly people have still violated these so-called digital systems which are supposed to be robust. So it's very important to be aware of ethics. So today courses are offered in universities on ethics. Companies like Microsoft have roles like a chief ethics officer. So it's very important to keep this in mind, otherwise artificial intelligence could again go into a very dangerous trap where it is not ethical. And you might have read about it in papers. Some employees in Google resigned their job saying artificial intelligence is being used for military applications. So what is ethical, what is not ethical is going to be a very important question. So where do we stand as a society, right? So one is automation is becoming very affordable. and it is going to take away some jobs. There is no denying that, right? So your stakeholders, your investors, they don't care about socially inclusive growth. What they want is productivity. They want to do products cheaper. So where is this taking us? So if you look at all roles in an organization, this can be, this analysis, we have borrowed this from sociologist Charles Perrow's way of classification of technology. It can be done for individual organizations or industries or maybe even at a country level. So it's a basic 2 by 2. On the x-axis you see novelty, and on the y-axis is programmability. So y-axis tells you how easy is a job to be written as a set of programs so that it can be automated. You have high and low. On the x-axis you have novelty or decision making. How many difficult scenarios are there where a human is required to take decision making, or can a machine take the decision on its own? So let's look at the top left box, right? That is a routine job. This is at the highest risk of getting replaced by automation. Any job you take, there is an amount of routine, repeatable steps which can be done with a machine like a robot or with artificial intelligence. So those jobs are at the highest risk of getting replaced by automation. And if you go to the top right bottom, professional technology. Even here, artificial intelligence is replacing some of the jobs of a doctor or a lawyer, for example. In US, certain eye tests are approved by the regulatory bodies to be done using a smartphone application. And the bottom right is the craft type of jobs. These are the most difficult to automate. It needs very, very hands-on people. The entire economy cannot be run with craft type of roles, but there is definitely a need for it. And especially for countries like India, this pushes us to be more hands-on in whatever job you do. And then non-routine jobs are jobs like scientists, where it's very difficult to automate with artificial intelligence. So this is the approach we are saying to basically do reskilling, whether it's an organization or a society. Routine jobs, it could be the service sector. These people need to be trained to gradually move towards craft type of roles. Similarly, professional technology should be moved to non-routine and craft jobs by means of reskilling. So how do you identify these skills? We have been talking about reskilling and new skilling, but what exactly are the skills? So here are some examples of estimating it. So ILO, International Labour Organization, calls it skill anticipation. So skill anticipation is a set of activities that are carried out to assess future needs. They suggest very quantitative techniques like forecast, brainstorming, seeking expert opinion using the Delphi method. So what we have suggested for organizations is to have these three roles: a gardener role, a farmer role, and a forester role. Gardeners are focused on today's needs. What are the identified skill sets? How do I train people? Farmers have a slightly medium-term mindset. What are the new areas where we need to train? Foresters have a long-term perspective. They look at the second-order environment. So here is one example. General Motors, for example, transferred 75% of their engineers working on transmission technologies from IC engine to electric vehicle technologies. So all said and done, whatever amount of automation happens, these are three broad types of jobs which will always need humans. So one is creativity for innovation, intuition or judgment, and empathy for fellow humans. So this could be in the healthcare industry or in other industries. So these are types of jobs which will always need humans. So we have gone through the stage of identifying areas which can be automated, but now policymakers are thinking about jobs which will definitely need humans, because we have gone beyond Industry 4.0. We are looking at Industry 5.0 so that it's socially inclusive, right? The benefits of all these automation and emerging technologies should not be left in the hands of a few people. It should flow down to all levels of the society. So that way it's very important to identify jobs where humans will definitely be required. We'll have to make some investments in reskilling them so that they are prepared to take up this economy. So with that, I'll close my speech. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Let me ask a question. Okay, go ahead. Or you can speak loud. I know.
Okay, I'll speak loud.
Yeah.
Can anybody hear? So my question to you, when you talk of skilling, do you intend skilling to be universally kind of domain specific or regional or even local? Because the problem that in India is that we do not map the skilling to industry. So for example, in Timbuktu or XYZ location,
if the requirement is for a janitorial skill, or the requirement for a carpenter skill, or instrumentation engineer, we are utopian, we follow a same kind of a yardstick, a guideline, and then there is mismatch. So the result is that there is a migration of labor from the villages to the... So Amitabh Kant, in one of his papers, said that, hey, if we don't contain or arrest this migration, we'll have a problem, both in the metropolitan here. My question to you is, how do you accentuate that process of localized skilling?
So, very good point, sir. I fully agree with what you said. It has to be bottoms up, so it has to start from local. So that was why we started writing in Tamil, because we felt that, like you said, we are all armchair analysts sitting and talking about these big things like AIML. But unless you take it down, you understand the local dynamics and adopt these things, it's not going to happen. So one is language. Awareness, it starts first, and awareness starts with what is the medium of instruction you use. Language has to be local, somebody who understands the local dynamics. So you take these big things, break it up, and how does it apply? Like we were talking to Professor Narayan about some of these energy sources, right? So it starts from energy, health, education. It has to definitely start from local. Language is one. I don't have a silver bullet to answer your question, but it cannot be top down. I definitely believe it has to be bottoms up from the grassroots level. Localizing it, again, diversity in our country, each village is unique even within a state like Tamil Nadu. So we need people who understand the local dynamics and use that specific language and usage of appropriate technology, not just suggesting that AIML will solve world hunger. It will not work that way.
My question is, sir, are we doing any gap analysis?
That's a good question. My answer is yes. I am a positive person, but I don't have the exact details of how is the government going about doing it. But yes, there are efforts. Many people have realized that that's the way to go about it. Have we reached a level where we have a complete gap analysis? The answer is no, but I am pretty sure many people have realized that that's the way to proceed, and there are steps being taken.
Sir, thank you for a good lecture, sir. Sir,
Yes.
For India, as per Modi's statement, 5 trillion economy should be obtained within 5 years. That is 368 lakhs crores, for which what kind of skill and knowledge that India needs, number one. Number two, is there any Indian cultural, moral, ethical value or imposing any limitations to obtain the skill, knowledge-based economy, sir?
So, from a corporate perspective, we do a lot of study on what are the incentives that we require for people, because even for all the
because at a corporate setting, it doesn't lead to the creativity, right? So like that's what's like pretty interesting about like the culture that I've noticed is the creativity side. I mean, if you're looking at knowledge transfer as just, hey, I have a problem and I need a solution, that's not necessarily, that's more, it's a different type of knowledge transfer.
Incentives is going to be a challenge. Even in corporates where we offer all these courses on online platforms, not many employees are taking it up. So promotions, new roles, rotation of jobs, those are the types of incentives in corporates. We'll have to think of something similar on the society. On the negative side, you're going to lose out employment. Again, awareness. People should know what they get out of a career like this, what do they get out of learning these skills. So I think it basically starts with awareness, but we'll have to think of what are the incentives to offer.
Okay, I think it's time for coffee break, and we'll take a quick coffee break and come back. Unfortunately, it's the coffee break that gets cut when there is such an interesting discussion. Very busy life.